Shortcut, life hack, right? But no, and I tell people all the time, mostly me and hair, I'm just cheap, and I don't want to pay for a haircut very often, so get it cut short and let it grow long, and I mean, you can cut your bills in half that way, so. Let me see this back. I think I'll just use this. Yeah, I'll just use it. All right, so we're at week 9 of 10 in the Beatitudes. Next week, we will close this series down. And next week, when we read through these, I'm going to try to have us all read through these together one time, since we've went through all of them together. But each week, we've been kind of trying to catch up, so to speak, and just look through the text to where we are and move along. Matthew chapter 5, beginning verse 1, and we'll go through the 9th Beatitude this morning. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and he sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. And here is what he said. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Which moves us into this week. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. In many ways, preparing for a sermon about peacemakers is easy for me. In many ways, it's really hard. It's easy because it's something that I feel very passionate about. I think it's a spot in which our society and sometimes even our churches have really missed the mark. We've really not gone far enough in teaching about peacemaking. And I recognize that for some people, I personally have gone too far, and that's okay. But so it's something I'm passionate about, and so sometimes it's a little tough to try to bring it to you in a palatable way, but also in a scripturally responsible way. I just want to challenge you in your life this week to think about peacemaking and what peace is, and our call to be peacemakers, to be people who are people noted, for those people are different because they seek to make peace. They seek to be people who honor other people in a way that bring people together instead of pushing people apart. But Christians aren't always known for being peacemakers. And that's why it gets a little tough, because we're coming up again on a political season. And politics really, unfortunately, is inescapable. And you're not going to hear me up here taking political positions about things in the sense of who you need to vote for and who you don't need to vote for. Some things transcend politics, though. Some things are biblical issues, and we need to talk about those. And as I always say, if you think I'm talking about your side or the other side, you're right. It falls everywhere. And the challenge to be peacemakers is so antithetical to the nature and the tenor of our country. This last week, there was the first debate, right? In one of the parties' things, and I didn't watch all of it, but I saw enough of it to know that they were yelling and screaming at each other, right? And and it happens on every side, and then eventually, the two sides will come together, and they're going to have debates. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to yell at each other. They're not going to speak kindly to each other. They're going to tear down instead of build up. And it's inescapable sometimes that kind of behavior and that kind of thinking has come over into our religious beliefs. And sometimes in our effort to hunger and thirst out of righteousness, and we've talked about this concept that all of these things have to be pieced together, pushed together, built upon each other. Because you can't hunger and thirst after righteousness without also being a person who is meek and who is pure in spirit, who in your hunger and thirst, sometimes if all you're doing is hunger and thirsting after righteousness, praise God that you're doing that, but you can do it to the point that you forget how you need to treat people along the path. In other words, you'll take your Bible and you'll run over people in the process of trying to get your point across. And so we need to be, and so peacemaking in many points is kind of a culmination of a whole lot of what these Beatitudes have meant. And that's why I think it's extremely difficult and it's extremely anti-cultural. It's not in the nature of our culture to be people who are peaceful. We, as a society, all we've known in many ways is war. But I'm not just talking about external wars, I'm talking about internal wars. We debate and we dialogue, and because of our freedom of speech, I'm pro freedom of speech. I'm glad I get to stand up here today and not worry about what I say getting me arrested, right? I'm pro freedom of speech. But with that also comes what? The potential that when people who all have freedom of speech get together, there's going to be contention, there's going to be frustration, there's going to be disagreement. So being a peacemaker in a society in which everybody gets to speak their mind becomes really tough. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of volume. Trying to cut through that and in the middle of this be not only some kind of middle unifying force, but also seeking to be biblical and seeking to be God-honoring in the middle of all that is tough. So I'm not coming to you to say, hey, everybody needs to be peacemakers. Peacemaking is easy. Peacemaking can be really tough. And I'm going to try to explain just a little bit of why I think peacemaking can be really tough. And by the way, again, many of these Beatitudes are things we need to be seeking to improve upon. The Beatitudes themselves are not even necessarily trying to tell you need to be a peacemaker. He's just telling you what the end result of peacemaking is. And so I want to, when we look back, let's go back one slide here. I want to be called a child of God. Amen? Anybody in here want to be a child of God? So while I may never be number one peacemaker, and that's what you're going to find, I do want to learn some things about peacemaking so I can be, because, there's nothing better than on the day that it all ends and everything I've done on this earth, if I can be that, I've accomplished something. If I can be that, all the wrongs, all the mistakes, everything along the path not going to matter anymore as long as I can be that. As long as God looks at me and He says, you're my child. And so I want to be a peacemaker. And because of that, I recognize that we've got to think some things. I want to show you just a couple of quotes about peacemaking. This one is actually hard to attribute. I tried to find it. I saw it in a couple of people's sermons. I saw it on the internet a couple of places, but I'm going to read it to you. And I'm going to leave it unattributed here. It's not because I want to take away from whoever said it. It was just kind of hard to tell who said it. I found one name, but I couldn't find that name anywhere. But here's what it says. There's a difference between a peacekeeper and a peacemaker. Peacekeepers don't care about resolving anything. They just want the noise to stop. In order to be a peacemaker, you actually have to confront the issue, deal with it, and try to broker peace in the midst of it. I hear that, and at first glance, it seems sort of right. At first glance, I kind of think, and as many of you know, and this is going to show up in this sermon, it's going to show up in a lot of my sermons, I'm back in school. I'm working on getting my master's in social work right now, and the end result of that I want to share with y'all, but know why? Because it means me being out, and I'm actually working in a field office a couple of days a week, so it's fair to share with y'all because you're, because this may impact you in some way why I'm doing this, but the end goal of that is for me to be able to do counseling down the road in a more ethical way, in a more proficient way. And some of the things that I'm studying, because I'm in school and doing a practicum a couple of days a week, it's going to come out in this sermon. And I look at and I observed the last couple of weeks the counseling environment. In many ways, this is kind of the counseling environment. It's to kind of go into the middle of conflict and broker peace between sides that are struggling to get along, struggling to figure out life, both individually and collectively. And so some of those things are going to come out in some of my sermons. Some of them are going to come out today. And so, if I'm going through this, I hope it can be some benefit to you along the process, not just in the end result. Some of me sees this, and I say there's some truth in this. But then I came across this quote by Charles Spurgeon, a famous theologian. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers. And one sure way of peacemaking is to let the fire of contention alone. Don't fan it, nor stir it, nor add fuel to it. Let it go out by itself. Begin your ministry with one blind eye and one deaf ear. That is not what that last quote said. It says quite the opposite. One says a way to make peace is to just leave it alone, and it'll go away on its own. And the other says you can't just be a peacekeeper. That's just somebody that doesn't want the noise. And you got to go into the middle of it, and you got to broker peace in the middle of it. Those are two conflicting things, aren't they? Really, these kind of stand as opposites. And here's the thing. I read one, and I say, oh, that's got a ring of truth to it. And I read the other, and guess what? That's got a ring of truth to it. And then you come across this. It's kind of a famous proverb. It's Proverbs, let's go here. All right, Proverbs chapter 26, verse 4 and 5 is probably one you've heard before. I've probably shared it before. Don't answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Next verse. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he'll be wise in his own eyes. Now, what's the proverb writer trying to teach us? What's he trying to say? He's trying to tell us that discerning when is the right time to speak, and when is the right time to ignore, and when's the right time to intervene, and when's the right time to let it go, when's the right time to jump in the middle of it, and, put yourself in the middle of it, and when it's time to draw back, when it's time to use your political capital, so to speak, and when it's time to let something go. You know, we use this terminology and this thought process that you've got to pick your battles, right? Is picking your battles tough, though, right? When is it the right time to pick a battle? When is it the wrong time to pick a battle? Has anybody in here ever had an experience where it was the right time to pick a battle and you didn't? Yeah. Have you ever had a position where it was the wrong time to pick a battle and you did? Yeah, probably this week, right? You understand what I'm trying to say is that this discernment that is required in peacemaking, it's tough. It's not easy. You notice the proverb writer here does not make a list about when it's right. Go back to, I'm going to get there. But he doesn't make a list about, or here's the times that you should confront the fool, right? And here's the time you should just leave the fool alone. He's leaving that to our discernment and our judgment. Now, here's what's going to happen in life. I made the joke about gray hair. There is some truth that as you get older and you see more and you dissect and deal with more conflict in your life, as you get older, you get better naturally, hopefully, okay, if you're paying attention, at learning when to and when not to pick battles. But survey every married couple in here, and you'll find that it's even those of you who have been married. I won't ask for a raise of hands. We have several people in here that have been married 50 plus years, long periods of time. It's still not an exact science, though, is it? We still make mistakes, even in that age. I've talked to people, and people that are being honest. And it's one of my famous things that you've heard me say it before. You'll hear me say it again. If you ever come across a couple that says, we've been married 50 years and we ain't never fought, ignore everything they say from that point forward. They're lying. And you can't trust liars, okay? You may fight different. Your fight may be that you went in the other room and ignored them for 3 days and say, oh, we didn't have a fight. You had a fight. You just called it something different, okay? We all experience conflict, but how do we broker peace in the midst of conflict? And this is important interpersonally with your interpersonal skills. It's important generationally with how we deal with politics and those big things in society. It's really, really important in church work. Because you get a bunch of people. We all believe in Jesus, amen. We all believe in the resurrection of Jesus, amen. But we've got some differences, opinions about some other things, don't we? And sometimes figuring out how to navigate that and having the leadership skills to navigate those disagreements is tough. And so there's a reason, I believe, that peacemaking is towards the end of the Beatitudes. Okay, so one of the things I mentioned is in some ways these can kind of be built as a ladder and they build upon each other. And I think that's because in order to be a peacemaker, you've got to draw from most all of these Beatitudes that we've already been talking about. Now, if you hadn't been here this your first week, that means you got time now to go back on YouTube for the next 8 weeks and catch up, right? But these skills, in many ways, peacemaking is putting those skills into practice. Some of those skills we've been talking about as we've been talking about some of these Beatitudes. Will meekness help you in it? in peacemaking? Absolutely. Will having a hunger and thirst for righteousness and what is right help you in peacemaking? Absolutely. Will being poor in spirit, not thinking more of yourself than you should? Absolutely. All these skills kind of in many ways culminate in this skill that requires this extreme diligence and discernment that is tough. So not everyone, by the way, is going to be an expert peacemaker, right? And you're not going to leave from one 30-minute sermon and say, hey, I've got the skills to go be an expert peacemaker. But here's what we can do. There are some principles, I think, that can aid us in this process, that can aid us to be better peacemakers. And here's what I've learned about people, and you'll continue to learn this. Different people think differently, right? Just by a show of hands, how many of you think that you think more scientifically, that you're a scientific thinker? Okay. How many of you think that you're kind of more of a creative thinker? Okay. And that's a very unofficial poll, but it's interesting that it kind of, from up here, kind of looked even. We process and think through things differently. One of the things that you learn in asking is peacemaking an art or science. When you start, and this come in, I've been thinking about this a good bit. When you start in social service fields, different social service fields, specifically in social work, counseling, that sort of thing, there's a big debate in those fields about what your degree should be. For instance, does anybody know if you got a math degree? Mandy's a math major. Some of you have math or science degrees. You have a bachelor's of science in math or science, right? If you have a creative arts graphic design degree, what are you going to have? You're going to have a BA, right? A Bachelor of Arts. A social work degree is called a BSW. It's a Bachelor's of Social Work, because there's a lot of debate in that field about what is art and what is science. They recognize that when you deal with people and you're dealing in the people profession, some of that's art. I mean, some of it is creativity, is thinking through people's problems with them. But there's also this heavy science factor of understanding how people's brains work and what's making them do what they do from a scientific process. And the goal of social work, and this is one of the reasons I love the field and I've always been, is that it's kind of a degree that's kind of in the middle. I like data and that sort of thing. I consider myself maybe a little bit more on the creative end of the spectrum, but I do like data and science, and I like gathering information. And I've met people who are so artistic, right, that they couldn't tell you who the president is today, right? And I've met people who are so scientific that they couldn't, make their way through a relationship of any sort, because they're so scientific, right? And when I think of peacemaking, I kind of think of it that if you were going to get a degree in peacemaking, it would have to just be a bachelor's of peacemaking, okay? Because it is art and it is science. There's some science to it. There's some things that you can do concretely and observe and see that can make you a better peacemaker. And there's some things that you can do artistically and more creatively in the way you approach people. When you go to broker a deal, let's say broker a deal, and that could be let's just pretend, let's take it out of the art, let's just take it into the corporate world, and you're brokering a deal. Does your demeanor and how you deal with things matter in those things? Absolutely. The deal may or may not get done. Do you knowing the facts and knowing the numbers, does that matter? Yeah. You don't know the numbers? I've watched enough Shark Tank to know if you don't know the numbers, you're not going to get a deal, right? And so you understand that having some of both is important. We've got at least one doctor here. We've got a lot of nurses and things. Bedside manner, doctors spend some time talking about bedside manner. Is bedside manner important in a doctor? Yeah, it's important. But if I have to choose, right, does my doctor understand medicine or does he understand how to talk to me well? I'm going to choose medicine, right? So there's a reason that's a bachelor's in science, right? The art's good, but the science, And so I want you to challenge yourself. If you are a science thinker, okay, we're going to talk a little bit in just a few minutes about the spirit of peacemaking. And in that particular section, pay closer attention, okay? I'm not telling you to take a nap now, but if you are going to take a nap, take it now. We'll come back to it, okay? But if you're more of an artistic thinker, we're going to try to think a little bit about the science. And so I want you to kind of focus in on that, because that may be the areas that you kind of need to improve and think through things better, okay? So here's what I want us to do is we're going to start with having the mind of a peacemaker. What are some tips, some thoughts that I think can help you have the mind of a peacemaker? First off, I want you, if you're a peacemaker, to recognize that reconciliation, all right, fixing things happens in the future, not the past. Now, this is not, and hear me clearly when I say this is not ignoring the past, okay? It's just recognizing that if all you do is live in the past, you'll never move forward, right? I considered and really thought about this, and then I recognized my grandmother would roll over in her grave. I considered actually using some cards. My grandmother struggled when we played Uno in the house, but I actually thought about dealing out a couple of hands and having a couple of people up here and rigging the hands. I was going to cheat, and I was going to deal somebody the best hand that I could deal. I was going to deal somebody the worst hand that they can have. And I was going to say, are you ready? Are you ready to lay down the hands, right? And the person who's got the 2 and the 6 and the 7 is not going to respond in the same way the person that's got the royal flush, right? Maybe you don't understand cards. Just one of those hands is good and one's bad, okay? We're not all dealt the same hand in life. And we, as people of Jesus, we need to recognize that we are not all dealt the same hands. That is a recognition of the past. If I look at the person who's dealt a really bad hand in life and say, I don't care about you because I've got this good hand, right? I don't care that you were born into poverty, and I don't care that you have all these issues that you've had to overcome in your life. I didn't have that, so why am I worried about that? Because I don't have that problem. Now, we as Americans, okay, this step on the toes, we like to think individualistically. Some cultures are not like that. They think much more culturally, And I would even argue that some people in this audience came from cultures that probably thought more communally, right? Sometimes they go to the opposite extreme, and it can be dangerous too. So I want us to recognize the past. I think you've got to recognize when somebody that's sitting next to you wasn't dealt the same hand as you. So there's got to be a recognition of that. But at some point in that process, there also has to be this question of, all right, now what? Where do we go from here? How do we move past that? Not in the sense that we totally ignore the past or we get, I'm not trying to get over the past. I'm saying, how do we productively work together towards creating something better? We'll throw it out there. Dealing with racial reconciliation in our culture. If you're a minority, there's a good chance that you have a higher statistical chance that you've been dealt some of the worser hands. It doesn't always hold true, but many times it holds true. And those who might have been dealt a good hand, sometimes what we want to do is we want to hold on to our good hand, and say, and I understand the pull here because I experienced this. This is not about other people. This is about me. But really what I need to do is I need to say, all right, what kind of hand have you got and what kind of hand have I got and what can we do to put those hands together and let's move towards progress in the future. Me recognizing your past, not ignoring it, but also thinking forward. Sometimes we want to just stay forever in that past. Notice what is here in Philippians chapter 3. Paul says, brothers and sisters, I don't consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, I forget what's behind and I strain towards what is ahead. Now he's talking about, by the way, his own misgivings there, his own struggles of his past. And he said, there comes a point where I've got to get focused forward. And if you, in brokering peace in relationships, brokering peace culturally, brokering peace, becoming a peacemaker, you can't go into that and completely ignore the past. But if you do nothing but acknowledge the past path and we don't set a vision towards the future, that's what Jesus people are about. Jesus people are future thinkers. hey, I see you've got a crummy hand. Here's a little bit of my hand that might help your hand. This card might help your hand. Because here's what I want. I want whether or not you were dealt the good hand or the bad hand. And by the way, sometimes what the world views as a good hand, what God views as a good hand, totally different, by the way. We see that in this, right? God cares. You think from a worldly standpoint that you were born poor, and you see how Jesus reacted to the poor. There's more grace for you on the horizon. So, but you know what I can do? I can say, I've got this hand. How can I assist you with your hand? How can we work together to make a better hand going forward? And so I want you to think forward. And sometimes in this, thinking of this from a more scientific thinking, think what are goals? What are things we can work towards? What are the things we can work towards as a church? One of the big things as a church that we can get in the rut, right? Of being past focused and now focused and never putting goals and dreams out in front. And what happens then? It's the number one way I've seen it in church after church after church. I just miss the way it used to be, Well, praise God for the way it used to be. One, it probably wasn't as good as you thought, right? And two, you can't go back to that. But you can put goal-oriented, future-focused things out front. And so I know as more of an artsy thinker that sometimes I just want to fly by the seat of my pants, right? Anybody that knows me knows that. But we need to have some goals out front, congregationally, individually, relationally, personally, because you need to make sure that you're moving forward and not just living in the past. And if we can be better peacemakers, if we think, what can we be in 2 years? What can we be in 5 years? Individually, collectively, even broader than that, even as a country. All right, second. In reconciliation, and I skipped ahead here, so I'll go quick on this one. Reconciliation thinks we, not I. It is our inclination always to take care of number one, right? Take care of myself. I can help you only if it does not inconvenience me in any way. And that is sometimes the way we think. And if we're going to move forward in making peace with people, we have to think, how do we make situations where everyone, there's that saying, everyone hurts a little bit, but also everyone gets something, right? We're moving forward in a way where I didn't get everything I wanted. I wanted, and church, let me tell you, sometimes I don't get everything I want, right? I mean that across the board. So how do we broker peace where instead of saying, all right, I didn't get what I want, but what can we do to move forward? Notice this passage with me. Luke chapter 6. This is a text of teaching, by the way. Then Luke's gospel, this is kind of synonymous as some of the teachings, Sermon on the Mount. So, but love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to get anything back. That's tough, right? We tend to lend to people, and we don't ask, whether or not I'll get back or not. We're asking, how am I going to make sure I get back more than what I gave to them? What's the interest rate? And he doesn't say do that to the people, to your family members. Family members, you give it to. Notice what he says. Your enemies. Sometimes when we broker success and think success and try to process what success looks like, it's always about how do I end up in the end instead of how do we end up in the end. And I want us to challenge ourselves that if we're going to be people who are peacemakers and we're going to better make peace, when we meet disagreement with your friends, with your neighbors, with your loved ones, start thinking instead of what do I get out of this? So that's an emotional response, right? It's emotion. Instead, we start, if we're future focused, we're going to start saying, what can we get out of this? How can I grow through this trial? How can I be better on the other side of this, right? And he says, if you do that, Jesus says this, your reward will be great. And you'll be, as just what we just saw, you'll be children of the Most High. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called what? Children of God. You're going to be children of the Most High when you broker peace with your enemies, when you deal with them in such a way that you say, hey, I don't like you, right? We've had our battles. We've had our struggles. But I want what's best for you going forward. And I'm even willing to give up something of mine to make it better for you going forward. Now, church, hear me clearly. This isn't natural. You're not going to do this. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and do this naturally. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of swallowing of pride. It takes a lot of work. But notice, God is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Jesus looked at us in our brokenness and our sin and our wickedness and our ungratefulness. And instead of seeing where we were going, he, through Jesus, said, I can envision a better future for them. And it's not going to happen because he's going to do it himself. We're going to work together. That's kind of the cool thing about God, guys. That the God who created the whole universe looked at you and said, we can work together. Now, he didn't need to look at you, all right? God had the ultimate hand in the scenario, but he looked at you and said, you know what? Here's my hand. You don't deserve it, but here it is anyway. And so we reciprocate that in how we think about and view others. All right, we got to get going. We're behind. Sorry. All right, so lastly, reconciliation is measured by peace, not victory. Okay? This is pretty simple, but we have to quit thinking about how we win and start thinking about what is going to honor King Jesus. All right? What is going to be honorable in his sight. Notice with me, Romans chapter 15. We who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Each of us should please our neighbors. Why? So we get something out of it? That's not what he says. He said we please our neighbors for their good, to build them up. You're thinking about how do we end this conflict, and everybody comes out a little bit more pointed towards Jesus, a little bit less selfish and a little more selfless, a little bit less thinking about how I can win, and more thinking about how we can have peace. Because here's the ultimate reality, is that if you can get to a point of peace in your life, get a point of peace with your spirit, point of peace with your soul, point of peace with your relationships, a point of peace in everything that you do, that's winning. That's winning Jesus' way. That's winning God's way. So challenge us to do those things. All right, we got to go. All right, spirit of peacemaker. Instead of just the mind, now let's talk about the spirit. First off, I want to challenge you, those of you who might be more scientific thinkers, to challenge yourself to be a gentle presence. Scientific thinkers, the science may be on your side, okay? The data may be on your side. But let me encourage you to understand that it does not matter how much data and science you have if your spirit shuts the other side out and they're going to listen to you. Married couples, I'm calling myself, okay? I'm talking myself. You may be right, okay? I think I've been right at least twice. I'm not sure. Not that I'm keeping score. But there are better, more significant things than being right. And I know that. I've had to swallow a lot of pride in my life because I like being right. And being a gentle presence is more important than being right sometimes. And if you want to foster relationships that will be better in the future than they have been in the past, you've got to look at things more than just whether or not they're right, you're right and they're wrong. But instead, you have to think, how can I be the midst in this? How can I be the peace in this storm? You've heard me say this before, and I don't use it as much as I used to, but I want to encourage you to think about this. One of the things I've learned, I learned it years ago, a thing called breath prayers. And they're little things that you say in your head throughout your day when you need to remind yourself of something that you don't do real well. Some of you may use sticky notes, right? Maybe you forget to take your medicine. Maybe you forget to brush your teeth, whatever it may be that you forget to do. little gentle reminders that you need through your day. And I've learned that if I can involve God in that process, that's even better. Sticks a little better. I have a little prayer that I pray in the midst of conflict, and I've dealt with sometimes in my conflict, and when I'm frustrated, when I want to speak my mind real harshly and firmly, and I understand, by the way, Jesus flipped tables in the temple, right? There was a time, but you know what he did before he did that? He went up on the mountain and he prayed and he wept over that city before he did it. He's being very intentional. And so let me challenge you to have a breath prayer. Mine is simply, help me to be Jesus in this situation. I've failed it many times, many times I've flipped, I've went way too far before I ever think that through. But a lot of times I'll catch my breath and I'll say, I need to be Jesus here. And Jesus meets people where they're at. Jesus deals with the big things. He deals with peace. He knows, hey, why did Jesus feed people before he taught them? He recognized an empty stomach, not gonna be a receptive heart, right? So it will help you prioritize, I think, if you have a prayer to be Jesus in the situation, or whatever your prayer may be. Some of you probably just say, help me, Jesus, and that's okay too, Some of you say that a little sarcastically, and you've been there. But I would just say that if you say that sarcastically, say it real. Really pray for God's help and strength. Learn to be a gentle presence, even when you may be right. And here's what you're going to learn, and you know this, science thinkers, right? And everybody knows this, me too. Sometimes you are adamant that you are right, and sometimes you're not. And the more gentle you are in the front end, the less crow you have to eat on the back end, right? So let's be a gentle presence, okay? All right, let's notice this text, James chapter 3. He says, for where you have envy, selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice, right? You got envy, you got selfish ambition, you're trying to be right. In the end, disorder. It's not going to end in peace. There's going to be the opposite of peace that's going to happen in those situations. All right, and notice, that text confused, I know. But the wisdom that comes from heaven has a priority list. First of all, it's pure. And then I love this term, okay? And if you don't get anything else from this sermon, do this. Be peace-loving. Love peace. You may not be able to nuance out what peace looks like in everything that you deal with in your life, but be peace-loving. Considerate, submissive, full of mercy, good fruit. Hey, these sound kind of like what? The fruits of the Spirit we've been going through, don't they? You be those, and peacemakers are going to sow in peace. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. In other words, there's bounty on the other side in Jesus. All right, second, make thorough judgments. Be careful how quickly, how harshly you judge other people. Because sometimes that first impression is not the right impression. And here's what I've learned is after I have made a judgment in my mind, it takes a lot of work to get past that initial judgment. But when I learn to be slower in my judgments on the front end, I have to do less work on the back end to overcome those bad judgments. So judge, as James will say, a righteous judgment. Have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed in him? This is Jesus, okay? And they're talking about, but this mob that knows nothing of the law, there's a curse on them. So a little context here, what's dealing with and the situation that's kind of happened and arising here is Jesus is under pressure from some people who are not thinking with their brains anymore. We talked about this in our class Wednesday night. Sometimes you kind of flip your lid and you quit working with the rational part of your brain and you just get focused on this concept of, this concept of being right, and you don't make good judgments, you make bad judgments, okay? And so that's what's happening here. He's saying, listen, all these people who are well educated up here, none of them have fallen for this Jesus trick. And you look at all those crowds over there, and look at them, they've all fallen for it. Now, who is right? The crowds, right? The people that had fallen for Jesus. And they're out to get Jesus' head. But there's this man in the presence named Nicodemus who had gone to Jesus earlier. We read that in the text. He was one of their own number. And he says, hey, wait a minute. Does our law condemn a man without hearing him to find out what he's been doing? Notice what he does. He says, we need to be careful before we make permanent decisions that we haven't processed and thought through very well. Okay? So if you work more on emotions and feelings, sometimes you have to stop, reactivate that part of your brain that starts telling you and teaching you how to make better decisions. And instead you got to look at it and say, wait, let's slow down. Let's make sure we know what's going on, that we can make wise decisions. This is going to help you in your relationships. It's going to help you get the facts on the table, okay? Make thorough judgments. All right, let's keep going. Last thing. Keep the main thing central. The person you're fighting with, because you have a disagreement about how you had a family issue, may have a really ugly big fat toe, okay? In the middle of the fight is not the time to tell them how ugly their big fat toe is, okay? The fight didn't have anything to do with their ugly big fat toe, okay? And I apologize for big fat toe. I got a big fat toe, okay? So I'm not judging. And my toe's probably ugly, but so frequently we turn to attacking the other side when that logical part of our brain ends. If you're going to be a peacemaker, you've got to stay focused on what you're actually trying to work through and deal with. And I understand I'm the king of deferment, of trying to change the subject, of getting it off of what I'm wrong about and getting it onto what they're wrong about. And I know, I still do it. But if we're going to have progress in making peace with people, we've got to actually keep the main thing, okay? And not push it off on others. And I'm telling you, church, I mean this all my heart. Hear me clearly. I'm working on this, but it is a struggle. All this stuff, it's a struggle. Peacemaking's tough. I'm not telling you this is all easy. But I am telling you that if you'll think towards the process and think towards the end, if you think towards, I've got to keep the thing that we're trying to solve, because what happens? It happens all the time, right? You end up getting mad about something, then it turns into a fight about 10 other things. And what happens by the end of the fight? You done forgot what it is that you started fighting about, right? I love that old analogy. There's the girl who goes in and she cuts the end off of her ham every year. She makes great hams, and so so somebody says, "Why do you cut the end off of your ham?" And she said, "I don't know." I went back to, she said, "I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna find out, because that's how my mom always did it, and so I guess that's the way I did it. And so there's got to be a secret to it, so we make great hams." She went back to her mom and said, "Mom, I don't know. That's how my mom did it." I don't know. So she finally went back to the grandmother, who was the first one. She said, "Well, I had an oven. It was too small, so I always had to cut the end off the ham, We're over here doing something. We don't know why in the world we're doing it, because we've lost track of what's most important. And sometimes we'll do that when we fight and argue and fuss and we have discord. Is we'll get so dead set that that's my enemy. We'll find things out about them and we'll see things in them that not even what we're struggling and fighting with. Notice this text. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spice, your mint, your dill, your cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law." You got all the little details right, but you don't know justice, and you don't know mercy, and you don't know faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter. There's nothing wrong with being right about your tithing system, but if it means neglecting the former, then you're wrong. If you miss the big picture, if you miss the big thing, if you miss what you're working towards, he says, "You blind guides. You strain out a gnat, and you swallow a camel." Don't forget, church, that as we deal with conflict and everything we do with conflict and try to be better peacemakers, that we don't get in the process of straining gnats and swallowing camels. And the way you do that is you get hyper-focused on the things that don't really matter, and you get focused on the things that, quite honestly, didn't even have anything to do with why you were mad or in discord in the first place. So you want to be a peacemaker? Maybe you're on the outside and you're trying to make peace. A lot of this I've been talking about from the perspective that you're in the discord, and sometimes that's the case, and many times that's the case. But particularly if you go into the middle of conflict and you're trying to help other people in conflict, you've got to get them on the same page of dealing with actual problems. Okay? And so we want to be a better peacemaker. We've got to be able to do that better. All right, we went way too long. Y'all forgive me, okay? Can y'all forgive me? Can y'all say, okay, I'll try to make it up to you soon, and we'll try to go short. But I appreciate you bearing with me. I do think this stuff is important. I think it's important enough to spend a little extra time on, because we need to have the right mindset, because if we're going to make a difference in this world, we've got to stand as different than the world. And I think this is one area, maybe above most every area, that in our world we can stand as something different when we choose different paths than the world. And so we're going to be known for our love for each other, and that love frequently is shown through this. It's shown through people who are peacemakers in the midst of conflict. So it is my prayer that through this you will be better prepared, better thinking, better processing as you leave here to take on the world. All right, thank you so much. We're going to have a song of encouragement. This has not really been a song, really been a sermon, at least not intentionally geared, I guess, to about many of the things that we struggle with. But here's what I recognize, many of the things that, about salvation and that sort of thing. But I do know what it means to not be at peace in your life. And I know what it's like to struggle with these concepts. And when your life is not at peace, it's tough. And if you're going through life and you're not at peace and you need some help, we would love to try to help best we can. Here's the thing. Some people, you come up here and you tell people, man, I'm really in a struggle in life. We may not have anything we can give you. We can't, we may not be able to fix it, but you know what we can do? We can pray. And we can seek to enter peaceful thinking and peace giving into your life where we can. And we want to do that. So don't leave. We want this to be a family. We want this place where you share your burdens. And that doesn't mean you got to come up here and stand in front of everybody every time. But we want that to be something where you're comfortable doing it now. But before you leave, if you're not at peace, there's one thing in this world that can bring you peace. And it's King Jesus. Because only through him can peace ever actually exist. And I want you to know King Jesus. But if you're struggling in your walk with him, or you need to start your walk with him, whatever your spiritual need, we'd love to help you while we sing together.